وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا أَن تَقُولُوا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ أَوْ تَقُولُوا إِنَّمَا أَشْرَكَ آبَاؤُنَا مِنْ قَبْلُ وَكُنَّا ذُرِّيَّةً مِّن بَعْدِهِمْ أَفَتُهْلِكُنَا بِمَا فَعَلَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ.
I think that in the context of theological apologetic debates regarding, does God exist, we really need to drop this whole we can't scientifically explain the origins of life nonsense. And I'm not saying that it's nonsense because it isn't true. It is the case that we don't have a scientific consensus on the origin of life. But the reason I'm calling it nonsense in this context is because it's just not a good argument.
Every location that's been examined to explain the origin of life fails miserably, not just slightly, miserably.
Called abiogenesis. To put simply, a pond of amino acids got heated from hydrothermal vents in the ocean floor that eventually evolved into all different types of life. Natural selection over time plus random DNA copying mistakes somehow equals all of life on Earth. It's a sad attempt at drawing a conclusion of the origin of life. In my opinion, it's unbelievable to even accept this theory.
So yeah, this is usually done to try and imply science can't explain it, therefore God. Despite what James Tour said that one time.
I am telling you that just because we don't have an explanation for how life originated, I can't, as a scientist, say, therefore God made it magically happen and poofed it into existence. I can't say that as a scientist. That's all I say. I don't tell people what they can believe or not believe. That's up to them.
But nonetheless, there is really no denying that this subject has had a very big and prominent place in the apologetic sphere and debates regarding apologetics. I mean, I am very glad that I don't have to spend any time worrying about any of this. Now here's where I think that all of those debates you just seen on the screen amount to time wasted, basically. The first problem is that you're mistaking epistemic access to an event, namely the origins of life, to be a comment on its ontological nature. So what I mean by that is that you're mistaking the fact that we don't know what happened to mean, or to try to imply that therefore there must not be a naturalistic explanation due to the fact that we aren't aware of one. Now, this is a problem because if you're trying to argue definitively, or you're trying to imply that the nature of the origin of life was some supernatural creation, the problem with this is that due to our lack of epistemic access, there is very little we can say at all about how life began. So then I don't see why you should insist on a supernatural explanation as opposed to a naturalistic one at the moment. In fact, I don't think a scenario exists in which it is sensible to argue that the origin of life came about by supernatural means. And the reason for this is because if we do discover some means of a naturalistic start for the origins of life and it becomes very convincing and it becomes the accepted hypothesis, then there is no reason to argue against that if the grounds on which we were arguing before was a lack of epistemic access to this event. If we have that, or if we have something that we think could very plausibly or possibly be that, then there's no need to resort to a supernatural explanation. But if we are living in a situation in which there was a supernatural creation, there is no way that we can know about it, because our only methods of trying to find out what happened is through science. But the problem with this is that science will not stop until it comes up with a hypothesis, and until then they'll continue trying. So in this scenario, they'll probably never reach a consensus, but it still wouldn't be sensible to argue for a supernatural origin of life even if we're living in that situation. And the reason for this is what I mentioned earlier about mistaking epistemic access to ontological reality, mistaking the fact that we don't know about something to mean that it must be supernatural. So to sum up, the statement, "we don't know about the origin of life," is not the same as "the origin of life had a supernatural cause." In fact, the latter statement, "the origin of life had a supernatural cause," implies that we do know about the origin of life, which would then negate the first claim. Another big problem with this argument is that you're making it so that an advancement in science could shake your faith if we do find a naturalistic explanation. So you're gambling, basically. And if you feel comfortable with that, well, you do you, but I don't see how you could.